Hello class, we're about to start the chapter 13 review, radical functions. We have number 1, convert the expression from exponential form to radical form. Now we have x to the 3/7 power. Now we know this denominator will become the index of the radical. So we have the 7th root of x to the 3rd power because the numerator would be our exponent under the radical. So this will be our final answer for number 1. Now we come to number 2. It says rewrite the expression with rational exponents. Don't simplify. So basically they want us to do the reverse of what we did for number 1. So then we would have x. The denominator of our fraction would be the index of this radical. And our numerator would be the exponent that's under the radical. So our final answer would be x to the 6/5. Now, we go down to problem number 3. It says here, for f of x is equal to 3 times the square root of x plus 5, and g of x is equal to 2 minus 4 times the square root of x. Find an equation for each given function by hand and simplify it completely. So now we have f plus g. So we do the f of x, which is 3 square root of x plus 5. We could put that in a parenthesis. Plus the g of x, which is 2 minus 4 times the square root of x. Now, since there's no exponents and anything multiplying to this parenthesis, we would drop the parenthesis here and bring down everything inside the parenthesis. And since this is a plus in front of the parenthesis, we'll bring everything down and its signs. Now what we need to do is combine like terms. 3 square root of x minus 4 square root of x will leave negative 1 square root of x. And then 5 plus 2 is 7. Now we don't need to leave this negative 1 because when we don't see a number in front of the radical, it's assumed to be a 1. So our final answer would be negative square root of x plus 7. Are there any questions from 3a? Okay, 3b. It's basically the same setup except for we have subtraction. So we had 3 times the square root of x plus 5 minus 2 minus 4 times the square root of x. So we would keep the first parenthesis the same. Well, we would drop the parenthesis. So we had 3 square root of x plus 5. And then because there's a minus sign in front of this parenthesis, we change the sign of everything inside of the parentheses. So it'll be minus 2 plus 4 times the square root of x. Now we combine like terms. 3 square root of x plus 4 square root of x is 7 square root of x. And 5 minus 2 is 3. So this right here would be our final answer. Are there any questions? Okay, so now we go down here to C. It's basically the same setup except for this time it will be multiplication. So we had 3 square root of x plus 5 times the parenthesis of 2 minus 4 times the square root of x. So now we will multiply this. 3 square root of x times 2. We know we would take the first term times the first term, which would give us 6 times the square root of x. And then we would take 3 square root of x times a negative. As a matter of fact, let me write this out because it'll be a lot easier if it's written out. So we'll take 3 square root of x times 2 plus 3 square root of x times a negative 4 square root of x. And then we would take plus 5 times 2 plus 5 times the negative 4 square root of x. Now, 3 square root of x times 2 is 6 square root of x. 3 square root of x times a negative 4 square root of x will give us a negative 12. And we know square root of x times square root of x is just x. And then 5 times 2 is 10. And 5 times a negative 4 square root of x is a negative 20 square root of x. Now we combine the like terms. Thank you. So we take the 6 square root of x minus 20 square root of x, which would be negative 14 square root of x. And then we would have minus 12x plus 10. And this would be our final answer. Okay, now, since you have this on video, you could pause it and copy this down because I'm going to have to erase some of this. So let me go ahead and erase this because I have to do the next problem and I need space as well. Okay, so now we have f divided by g. So we would take this value here, and we know f will be 3 square root of x plus 5. And that's divided by g, which is 2 minus 4 times the square root of x. Now, we have to multiply the numerator and denominator by the conjugate of the denominator. That comes a little later in chapter 13. If you have not watched the video yet, please watch the video. I believe that's in either 13.3 or 13.5. So now we take the conjugate. The conjugate is basically you writing what's down here in our denominator, but changing the operation sign from subtraction to addition. So we'll multiply the numerator and denominator by that value. Now, with our numerator, we notice we have a binomial multiplied by a binomial. So we do need to multiply that. So I'm going to take up some room here. We will have 3 square root of x times 2 plus 3 square root of x times 4 square root of x plus 5 times 2 plus 5 times 4 times the square root of x. Now that is our numerator. Now our denominator, whenever you multiply conjugates, you can multiply the first term by the first term, which will give us 4, and the last term times the last term, which will give us a negative 16x. Now, we take care of this numerator. 3 square root of x times 2 will give us 6 times the square root of x. 3 square root of x times 4 square root of x will give us a positive 12x. 5 times 2 is 10, and 5 times 4 times the square root of x will give us 20 square root of x. And that's still all over 4 minus 16x. Now we combine the like terms. This will give us 26 square root of x plus 12x plus 10, all over 4 minus 16x. Now we can simplify this because 26 square root of x, 12x, and 10 all has 2 in common. And 4 and 16 also has 2 in common. So we'll factor out a 2 here, and that'll give us 13 square root of x plus 6x plus 5 all over. We could factor out a 2 here, and this will give us 2 minus 8x. Now listen, in our denominator, I know we could factor out a 4. However, since we only was able to factor out a 2 here, if we factor out this 2 here, this would simplify out, because then we wouldn't have to multiply at the end. So these 2's will simplify out, and we add 13 times the square root of x plus 6x plus 5 all over 2 minus 8x. And that is the final answer. Now, we're on the next page. We come here to 4a. We have the square root of 8x to the 6, and they want us to simplify each expression by hand. So now we pull out all perfect squares here. The highest perfect square in 8 is 4. The highest perfect square in x to the 6 is x to the 6. And we still will be left with a square root of 2. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of x to the 6 is x cubed times the square root of 2. And this is the final answer for 4a. Now we come to 4b. We do the exact same thing. We put out all perfect squares, and everything that's left go into this other radical. The highest perfect square in 18 is 9. The highest perfect square in x to the 7th is x to the 6th. And the highest perfect square in y to the 10th is y to the 10th. Now what's left over, we would have 2 and x left over. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of x to the 6th is x cubed. The square root of y to the 10th is y to the 5th. And we still would be left with the square root of 2x. And this is our final answer. Now we go here to C. Now, if you notice here, we don't have any like terms because in order for them to be like terms, they must have the same index in the radical and also the same radicand, or the number under the radical. But if you notice here, all of these, except for the 5x, all of them has perfect squares under the radical. So we will break this up. 20 has the highest perfect square of 4, and that would leave a 5x under that radical. Minus 2, 45, the highest perfect square in 45 is 9, and that will leave under that radical 5x. And then we'll bring down the plus 7 times the square root of 5x. Now, we know the square root of 4 is 2. 5 times 2 is 10, so it would be 10 times the square root of 5x. Then we have minus 2, the square root of 9 is 3. Minus 2 times 3 would give us a minus 6, square root of 5x. And then plus 7 times the square root of 5x. 10 square root of 5x minus 6 square root of 5x plus 7 square root of 5x, because all of these are like terms. So you do 10 minus 6 is 4 plus 7 is 11, and you bring down your square root of 5x. So your final answer here would be 11 times the square root of 5x. Now we come here to D. We have a square root times a square root. Since they have the same index in the square root, you can multiply them to one square root. 5 times 7 is 35, and A and B would just be A times B. So this is the final answer to D. Are there any questions on A, B, C, or D? Okay, now we come to E. Now E, we have 3 times the square root of x times this parenthesis here. So we would do the distributive property. It would be 3 times the square root of x times the square root of x plus 3 square root of x times negative 7. So 3 square root of x times the square root of x would just give us 3x. 3 square root of x times negative 7 will give us a negative 21 square root of x. So that is the final answer for E. Now we come here to F. We have a binomial multiplied by a binomial. So we have to do the distributive property, sometimes commonly called FOIL. So we would do, and I'm going to write this over here to give myself more room. We would do 2 square root of A times 5 square root of A plus 2 square root of A times the square root of B minus the square root of B times 5 square root of A minus the square root of B times the square root of B. So now we multiply. 2 times 5 is 10. The square root of A times the square root of A we know will give us A. 2 we will bring down. The square root of A times the square root of B is the square root of AB. Negative square root of B times 5 square root of A will give us a minus 5 square root of AB. A negative square root of B times the square root of B will give us a negative B. Now we will go through and combine like terms. We got 10A, 2 square root of AB minus 5 square root of AB will be a negative 3 square root AB, and then minus B. And we're done with that problem. Now, if we look here at G, we basically have a binomial times a binomial. And you notice the only difference between these two parentheses is one is subtraction and one is multiplication. So we just need to multiply the first two terms and the last two terms. So this will give us 25A minus 49B. And that will be the final answer. Now, for the next problem, we have this parenthesis squared. So we will write out this as 2 parentheses.